She reached into her own pocket and paid for a stranger's coffee, a man whose card had just been declined in front of everyone. She had no idea that the embarrassed man standing across her counter controlled a $4.2 billion empire, or that her $5 act of kindness was about to change both their lives forever. Have you ever done something kind for a complete stranger? Something small, something you forgot about by the end of the day? What if that one moment, that throwaway act of generosity, was the very thing someone had been searching for their entire life? What if your kindness was the answer to a prayer you never even heard? In a world where everyone wants something, where every smile hides an agenda, where billionaires are surrounded by hundreds of people but trusted by none, one man made a desperate and secret decision. He stripped away his name, his wealth, his power, and walked into a tiny cafe in Savannah, Georgia, hoping to find the one thing his fortune could never buy. What happened next will make you rethink everything you believe about love, about wealth, and about the true cost of kindness. But I have to warn you, this story has a twist that nobody saw coming, not even him. Before we dive in, if stories about real love and unexpected miracles speak to your heart, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and tap that bell. Trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. The morning light came through the windows of the Wren Café like liquid gold, soft, warm, unhurried. It spilled across the worn wooden floors and settled into the cracks of the mismatched tables like it had been doing so for years. The chairs were old, each one a different color, a different shape, a different story. The walls were lined with framed photographs of the Savannah riverfront, vintage postcards, and a chalkboard menu written in handwriting so whimsical it looked like it belonged in a children's storybook. The air smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. The low hiss of steaming milk blended with the soft murmur of early morning conversations. A spoon clinked against ceramic. A newspaper rustled. Someone laughed, quietly near the window. And beneath it all, the faint melody of a jazz record played from a speaker tucked behind the counter, filling the room with a warmth that went beyond temperature. This was the Wren. Not fancy, not polished, not trying to be anything other than what it was. A place that made strangers feel welcome and made regulars feel like family. And at the center of it all, moving behind the counter like a river through a valley, was Marin Ashford. She was the kind of woman you noticed without quite knowing why. It was not her appearance, though her auburn hair, always loosely pinned with a few rebellious curls escaping near her temples, caught the light in a way that made it hard to look away. It was not her voice, though it carried a melody of its own, bright and steady, and always on the edge of laughter. It was something deeper, something you felt rather than saw, a warmth that radiated outward from her like heat from a candle, drawing people in without effort or intention. Her hands were never still. They brewed, they poured, they wiped, they arranged, and in the quiet spaces between tasks, they wrote small messages on napkins, tucked beneath saucers or slid inside pastry bags. You are someone's reason to smile today. Or, the hardest days grow the strongest hearts. Or, you carry more light than you know. She never signed them, never watched to see if anyone read them, never expected a thank you or even an acknowledgement. That was not the point. The point was simply the giving, the quiet, invisible act of love folded into paper and placed where it might be found by someone who needed it most. There was Mr. Hargrove, the retired literature professor who came in every morning at 7:15 sharp. He always ordered Earl Grey with a splash of honey, and he always sat at the same table by the window, reading a different book each week. Marin knew his order before he reached the counter. She would have it waiting, steam curling upward, a napkin note tucked beneath the saucer. He never mentioned the notes, but she noticed he always tucked them into his book before leaving, like bookmarks made of kindness. There was Juno, the anxious college student who studied for hours in the corner booth, headphones on, highlighter in hand, eyes wide with the quiet panic of someone carrying too many expectations on too small a set of shoulders. Marin always brought her a free refill without being asked, and sometimes a cookie, just because. And there was Diane, the single mother who came in every Thursday afternoon with her 2 small children. She always ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a small drip coffee, and she always let the kids share a muffin, never one for herself. Marin noticed. She always noticed, and every Thursday, She would accidentally make an extra sandwich that would just go to waste if someone did not take it. Diane always protested, and Marin always insisted. And by now, it had become a quiet ritual between them. An unspoken agreement that kindness did not need permission. This was Marin's world. Small, modest, beautiful in its simplicity. But beneath the bright smiles and the easy laughter, there were layers she did not often show. She had grown up on the outskirts of Savannah, in a small clapboard house with a leaking roof and a garden that her mother tended like a cathedral. Her mother, a woman named Ruth, had worked double shifts at the hospital laundry for as long as Marin could remember. Hands always raw, back always aching, but never once complaining. Ruth believed that hard work was a form of prayer, and that kindness was the only currency that never lost its value. Marin's father had left before she was old enough to remember his face. There were no photographs, no letters, no explanations, just a space where someone should have been, and a silence that her mother filled with love and labor and the quiet determination to give her daughter a life worth living. Marin had put herself through college, studying fine arts at a state university, working nights at a diner to pay for supplies. She graduated with honors and a mountain of debt, and instead of chasing gallery fame or corporate design jobs, she came back to Savannah, back to the community that raised her. She taught watercolor classes at the senior center 3 evenings a week, working with elderly residents who painted not for recognition but for the pure joy of creation. Her favorite student was a 92-year-old woman named B, who painted nothing but sunsets, every single class, every single canvas, sunsets. When Marin once asked her why, B had looked at her with eyes that held 9 decades of living and said, "Because every ending deserves to be beautiful, dear." Marin had never forgotten those words. Her dream was to open her own art studio someday, a place where art was not a luxury but a language everyone could speak, a place where children and elders and struggling souls could come and create without judgment or cost. She had sketched the layout 100 times in her notebook. She knew exactly where the windows would be, exactly how the light would fall, exactly what color she would paint the walls. But dreams cost money, and money was something Marin measured carefully. Her apartment above the cafe was small, barely 2 rooms. The kitchen and living area blended into one space, and the bedroom was just large enough for a bed and a dresser. But the walls were alive, covered in her paintings, landscapes of the Savannah marshes, portraits of people she loved, abstract pieces that pulsed with color and emotion, and on the windowsill, jars of wildflowers she picked from the roadside on her morning walks. Because beauty, she believed, should never be something you had to pay for. She was not wealthy. She was not powerful. She was not the kind of woman the world would stop to notice. But she was the kind of woman the world desperately needed. And she had no idea that someone was about to walk through her door. Someone who would see in her everything the world had overlooked. Across the city, in a penthouse that occupied the entire top floor of the most exclusive building overlooking Forsyth Park, Dominic Hale stood at the window and watched the rain. The glass was floor to ceiling, immaculate, not a single smudge or streak. The view was extraordinary. The park stretched out below like a painting, its ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss, its fountain catching the streetlight in delicate silver arcs. Beyond it, the rooftops of Savannah, elegant and timeless, fading into a horizon bruised with storm clouds. It was the kind of view that people paid millions for, and Dominic had paid exactly that, $7.4 million, for a silence that was curated, designed, engineered by architects and interior designers who charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. But tonight, that silence felt like a coffin. He had just returned from a gala, the Hale Foundation annual benefit. 300 guests, crystal chandeliers, a string quartet, champagne that cost more per bottle than Marin earned in a week. Every hand he shook came with a smile. Every smile came with an angle. Every conversation was a negotiation wearing the mask of pleasantry. 300 people had attended, and not a single one had asked him how he was doing. He loosened his tie, let it fall onto the Italian marble counter, poured himself a glass of water and stood there, staring at the skyline, feeling the weight of a life that looked perfect from the outside and echoed with emptiness from within. Dominic Hale, founder and CEO of Hale Enterprises, a name that moved markets, shaped skylines, appeared in Forbes and Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal with a regularity that had long since stopped flattering him. His company held assets in real estate, technology, green energy, spanning 3 continents. His net worth, according to the latest estimate, was $4.2 billion. And he was lonely, not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone. He was rarely alone. He had assistants, advisors, board members, investors, an entire ecosystem of people whose livelihoods depended on his decisions. He was surrounded, constantly, relentlessly, suffocatingly, but none of them saw him. They saw the portfolio, the net worth, the influence. They saw the man on the magazine cover, the man behind the podium, the man whose signature could fund an entire hospital wing or collapse a competitor's stock price. They saw Dominic Hale, the brand, the asset, the opportunity. They never saw Dominic, just Dominic. He thought about his childhood, a brownstone in the historic district, books lining every wall. His father, a corporate attorney, measured love in achievements, grades, awards, milestones, not in hugs or bedtime stories or the simple act of being present. His mother was there, physically, always in the next room, but emotionally, she existed behind a glass wall that Dominic could see through but never break. He learned early that performance was the price of affection, that success was the language his family spoke, and he became fluent, ruthlessly fluent. He built his company from nothing, a startup in a rented office that grew into an empire that reshaped the Savannah skyline and beyond. But somewhere along the way, between the billion-dollar acquisitions and the magazine profiles and the penthouse with the $7 million view, he had lost something he could not name, something essential, something human. He set down his glass, walked to his bedroom, opened the closet, past the rows of tailored suits and Italian leather shoes, past the watches displayed in a glass case, one of them a Patek Philippe worth more than most people's homes. He reached to the back of the closet and pulled out a simple olive green jacket, slightly wrinkled, and a pair of worn boots he had not touched in years. He put them on, stood in front of the mirror, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not recognize the man looking back, not because the clothes were unfamiliar, but because the man wearing them looked, for a fleeting moment, free. He picked up his phone, dialed his assistant. Clear my schedule. 3 weeks. No meetings. No appearances. No security detail. Sir, is everything all right? Everything is fine. I just need to disappear for a while. He ended the call, removed his watch, left his wallet on the counter, took only a single card, one that was linked to an account he rarely used, and stepped out into the Savannah rain, anonymous, invisible, ordinary. For the first time in 20 years, no one on the street looked twice at him. No one whispered his name. No one angled for a photograph or a handshake or a favor. He was nobody, and it was the most liberating feeling he had ever known. He walked for hours, through the squares, past the fountains, along the riverfront where the old cotton warehouses had been converted into restaurants and galleries. He watched people, really watched them. A father lifting his daughter onto his shoulders to see a street performer. 2 elderly women sharing a bench and a bag of pralines. A young man playing guitar on a corner, his case open, a few crumpled bills inside, eyes closed, lost in the music. This was the world he had forgotten, the world that existed beneath the spreadsheets and the stock tickers and the conference calls that consumed his days, the world that was messy and imperfect and achingly beautiful. He did not know what he was looking for, but he knew what he was missing. Connection, real connection, the kind that had nothing to do with what you owned or what you controlled, the kind that saw past the surface and held on anyway. Someone who sees me, he thought. Not my name, not my net worth, just me, and somewhere in the rain-soaked streets of Savannah. That prayer began to find its answer. It was a Tuesday morning. The rain had softened to a drizzle, the kind that hung in the air like mist, turning the world slightly blurred at the edges. The wren was warm and alive with its usual morning rhythm, the hiss of the espresso machine, the clink of spoons against ceramic, the low murmur of conversations braiding together into a tapestry of ordinary life. Marin was restocking the pastry display, arranging lemon scones she had baked at 5 that morning. The kitchen still smelled of butter and citrus. and her fingertips were dusted with flour she had not quite washed away. She was humming, a habit she was barely aware of, some half-remembered melody her mother used to sing while hanging laundry on the line. The door opened with a soft creak. A gust of damp air swept through, carrying the scent of rain-soaked magnolia and wet cobblestone. Maren looked up automatically, her welcoming smile already in place, and then she paused. A man stood in the doorway, tall, dark hair damp from the rain, a few drops still clinging to his jaw. He wore a simple olive-green jacket, slightly wrinkled, and worn boots that had clearly seen miles. There was nothing about him that announced wealth or importance. No designer label, no polished confidence, no entourage. But there was something in the way he held himself, the way his dark brown eyes swept the room with quiet intensity, as though he were not just looking but absorbing, memorizing, taking in every detail, every face, every sound, the way someone does when they have been starved of something real for a very long time. He stepped inside, and the warmth of the cafe seemed to reach out and fold around him like an embrace. He stood in line behind Mr. Hargrove, who was collecting his usual Earl Grey, and behind Juno, who was ordering her second coffee of the morning with the glazed determination of someone who had been studying since dawn. He waited patiently, hands resting loosely at his sides, his expression calm but distant, like a man watching the world from behind glass. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the counter, and his eyes met Maren's. For a single suspended moment, the clatter of the cafe seemed to dim. The steam from the machines, the murmur of voices, the jazz record spinning softly in the background, all of it receded, just for a heartbeat, just long enough for something to shift in the air between them. "Good morning," she said, her voice bright, her smile instinctive and warm. "What can I get for you?" "Morning," he replied. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that did not need volume to command attention. It carried a quiet steadiness, as though every word had been considered before it was spoken. "Just a black coffee, please, and one of those." He glanced at the display case, his eyes landing on the scones. "Lemon scones, if they are as good as they look." Maren grinned. "Better. I made them this morning." He smiled at that, just barely, a flicker of warmth that appeared and vanished like a candle in a draught. But it was real, and Maren noticed. She rang up the order. $4.75. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a card, placed it against the reader. The machine blinked. A small red light. Declined. She tried again, tapping the screen, repositioning the card. Declined. One more time, holding the card steady, waiting. Declined. A faint flush crept up his neck. Slowly, like a tide rising, he exhaled through his nose, checked his wallet. Empty. He looked up at her, and, for the first time, the composure cracked. Just slightly, just enough for her to see the vulnerability beneath. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I do not know what is going on. This has never—" He trailed off, the sentence dissolving into the kind of silence that is heavier than words. And this is the moment that changed everything. The moment that two lives pivoted on an axis so small it could have been missed entirely. Maren did not hesitate. She slid the coffee cup across the counter, already filled, steam rising in a graceful curl. "Hey, do not worry about it. Machines are moody. This one especially." She said it lightly, easily, as though declined cards happened 10 times a day and were barely worth mentioning. She placed the scone into a small paper bag, set it beside the cup. Her smile never wavered, never became pity, never became awkwardness. It remained exactly what it had been from the start. Warm, genuine, effortless. He blinked. "No, I cannot let you." "You can," she interrupted gently. "It is a cup of coffee and a scone, not a down payment on a house." She tilted her head slightly, a playful gleam in her eyes. "You would actually be doing me a favor." That scone was going to sit there getting lonely. He stared at her for a long, searching moment, as if her kindness were a language he had not heard spoken in years, as if she had reached across the counter and touched something inside him that had been locked away so long he had forgotten it existed. Then he exhaled. and a real smile appeared. Not wide, not practiced, but true. The kind that starts somewhere deep in the chest and rises slowly, reaching the eyes before it ever reaches the mouth. "Thank you," he said softly. "Truly." She shrugged, one shoulder lifting and falling with easy grace. "Pass it on someday. That is all I ask." He picked up the coffee, the bag, and as he turned to leave, he paused, glancing back over his shoulder, his eyes finding hers one last time. "What is your name?" "Marin." He repeated it quietly. "Marin," as if tasting the word, letting it settle on his tongue. Then, almost to himself, "I will remember that." And he walked out into the rain. Now pause for a second. Imagine you are in Marin's shoes. A stranger's card is declined. You barely know them. Would you reach into your own pocket? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you are loving this story so far, hit that like button. It helps more people discover stories like this one. The door closed softly behind him, and the cafe resumed its rhythm. The espresso machine hissed. Mr. Hargrove turned a page. Juno's highlighters squeaked across a textbook. The jazz record moved into its next track, but something had shifted, something invisible and unnamed, like a note struck on a piano that continues to vibrate long after the finger has left the key. Marin stood behind the counter for a moment longer than usual, not frozen, not dramatic, just still, as though her body needed a moment to process what her heart had already registered. The exchange had been ordinary by any measurable standard. A cup of coffee, a declined card, a small kindness extended without thought. She did these things every day. For Diane, for Juno, for anyone who needed a moment of grace in a graceless world. But this felt different, not in a way she could articulate. Not romantic, not yet, but resonant. Like hearing a song for the first time and knowing somehow that you had been waiting for it your entire life. She shook it off, tucked a curl behind her ear, and moved on to the next customer. That night, after closing, she stayed behind, wiping down counters, stacking chairs, humming softly to the last track on the record before the needle reached the end and the speakers went quiet. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the Savannah streets glistened like polished obsidian. Streetlights threw halos of gold into the lingering mist, and the distant sound of a saxophone drifted from somewhere unseen. She sat at her favorite table by the window, the one with the wobbly leg she had never gotten around to fixing, a cup of chamomile tea in her hands, her worn sketchbook open on the table before her. She did not plan to draw him. Her hand simply moved, pencil to paper, following some instinct she did not question. And when she finally looked down at what she had created, there he was, the stranger, the quiet intensity of his dark eyes, the rain clinging to his collar, the almost smile that had appeared and vanished like sunlight through clouds. She had captured something in the sketch that surprised her, not just his features, but something beneath them, a loneliness, a searching, a hunger for something that had nothing to do with coffee. She stared at the drawing for a long time, then laughed softly, shaking her head. "You are drawing men you have spoken to for 45 seconds, Marin. That is a whole new level." But she did not tear the page out. She closed the sketchbook gently, finished her tea, and climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment, where her paintings watched over her like old friends and the wildflowers on the windowsill caught the last of the moonlight. She fell asleep quickly, but her dreams were strange, full of rain and warm voices and the scent of coffee, and a pair of dark eyes that seemed to see her, really see her, in a way she had not been seen in a very long time. Across the city, in the penthouse he suddenly could not stand to be in, Dominic Hale sat in his car in a quiet corner of a downtown parking lot. The dashboard clock glowed 8:47. The engine was off, the windows were down, and the cool night air of Savannah drifted through, carrying the scent of magnolia and distant rain. He stared at the paper cup in his hand, a simple cup from a small cafe, nothing special about it, except for the note tucked beneath the sleeve. He had not noticed it at first, not until he was halfway through the coffee, and his thumb had brushed against something that was not part of the cup. He pulled it out, a small piece of paper, handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. "You carry more light than you know." He read it 3 times, the first time with surprise, the second time with something that felt dangerously close to emotion. and the third time with the slow dawning recognition that this woman, this stranger who had paid for his coffee without a second thought, had no idea who he was, had no idea what he was worth, and had been kind to him anyway. Not kind in the way people were kind to Dominic Hale. The calculated kindness, the strategic generosity, the charitable gestures that always came with a press release or a tax deduction or expectation of reciprocity. This was different. This was kindness in its purest form, unconditional, unrehearsed, given freely with no thought of return. He leaned back in his seat, eyes lifting toward the city skyline, the muted glow of Savannah stretching out before him. He had built buildings taller than the ones he was looking at, funded developments that transformed entire neighborhoods. His name was etched into cornerstones and dedication plaques across the city, and yet, the most meaningful thing that had happened to him in months, maybe years, had cost him absolutely nothing. "Someone saw me," he murmured, the words barely audible, even to himself. Not my name, not my money, just me. The realization sank deep, settling into a place inside him that had been hollow for so long he had forgotten it was there. It was both humbling and strangely comforting, like stepping into a warm room after years of standing in the cold. He sat there for a long time, letting the sound of passing cars and distant music blend into the background, the jazz notes drifting from a club somewhere down the street, the soft laughter of couples walking past, the hum of a city alive with stories he had never taken the time to notice. Then he reached for his phone, pulled up a map, scrolled until he found it, the Wren Café. He read the name twice, as if committing it to memory, the way you memorize a coordinate, a location you intend to return to. Tomorrow, he thought. I will go back, not as Dominic Hale, not as anyone important, just as a man who wants to know the kind of woman who turns a $5 kindness into something that stays with you long after the coffee is gone. He finished the last sip, the faint taste of lemon scones still on his tongue, and for the first time in years, he did not feel alone. The next morning, the door of the Wren creaked open at 7:42. Marin was arranging a fresh batch of blueberry muffins in the display case. She heard the door, looked up, and her heart did something she did not expect. It jumped, just slightly, like a bird startled from a branch. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a small, quiet flutter that she felt all the way down to her fingertips. He was back. Same olive jacket, same worn boots, same calm presence that somehow made the room feel both fuller and quieter at the same time. He stood in line, casually, like any other customer, but when his eyes found hers across the counter, there was something new in them, a warmth that had not been there yesterday, a softness, as if the wall he carried around himself had thinned overnight. "Good morning," he said, and his voice carried the same low steadiness she remembered. But there was an ease to it now, a gentle undercurrent of something that might have been relief. "Good morning," she replied, bright smile already in place. Back for more, he chuckled softly, his voice smooth and genuine. "I did not get a chance to thank you properly yesterday." "No worries," she said, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "You survived without your scone emergency, did you not?" He laughed, and it was different this time, softer, more relaxed, as if he had shed some invisible weight between yesterday and today. "Barely," he said. "I think I need a second chance." She raised an eyebrow. "Playful, lucky for you. I make excellent second chances." As he reached the counter, he introduced himself, quietly, almost carefully. "I am Dom," he said. No last name offered, no explanation, no attempt to impress, just a name, simple and honest. Marin nodded, accepting it without question. "Dom," she repeated. "I like it." He ordered the same thing, black coffee, a pastry. He paid this time. The card worked without issue, and Marin did not mention yesterday, did not tease him about it, did not make him feel the residue of that small embarrassment. She simply treated him the way she treated everyone, with warmth, with ease, with the quiet dignity of someone who understood that everyone carries invisible weight. He took his order and sat at the corner table by the window, the one with the view of the cobblestone street and the flower shop across the way. He opened a book, but he did not read much. His eyes drifted to the room, to the people, to her. He watched her work, the way she moved, efficient but never hurried, the way she greeted every customer by name or by order, the way she laughed with Mr. Hargrove about something in his book, the way she quietly refilled Juno's coffee without being asked, the way she tucked a napkin note beneath Diane's saucer with a conspiratorial smile. He watched all of it, and he understood. She was not performing. She was not curating an image. This was simply who she was, a woman who had chosen kindness as a way of life, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. He stayed for 2 hours that first morning, and when he left, he nodded to her, quietly, gratefully, and she nodded back. And something in the exchange, in the simplicity of it, felt like the beginning of a conversation that would take a very long time to finish. He came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Over the next 2 weeks, Dom became a regular at the Wren. He arrived each morning around 7:30, ordered black coffee and whatever pastry Marin recommended, and sat at the corner table, sometimes with a book, sometimes with a small notebook in which he scribbled things she could not see, sometimes with nothing at all, just sitting, watching, being present in a way that suggested he was relearning how. Their conversations grew the way vines grow, slowly, persistently, reaching toward light. It started with small things, the weather, the scone recipe, the street musician who played violin outside on Thursdays and always drew a crowd of pigeons that seemed to prefer Beethoven to Bach. But slowly, the conversations deepened, found their way beneath the surface. She told him about her mother Ruth, about the double shifts, the raw hands, the garden that bloomed every spring like a small miracle. She told him about growing up without a father, about the empty space at the dinner table that was never acknowledged but always felt. She told him about teaching watercolor at the senior center, about B, the 92-year-old who painted nothing but sunsets, because every ending deserves to be beautiful. She told him about her dream, the art studio, the space where art would be a language, not a luxury. She talked freely, without reservation, without the careful editing she usually applied to conversations with people she did not know well. Something about Dom made her feel safe, as though she had found someone who would hold her words carefully, not as ammunition, not as leverage, but simply as gifts. And he did. He listened the way few people ever had, not waiting for his turn to speak, not formulating responses while she was still mid-sentence, not offering solutions or opinions or judgments, just listening, with his whole body, his eyes steady on hers, his posture open, his silence full of attention rather than absence. When he did speak, his words were careful, measured, chosen with the precision of someone who understood their weight. He told her about growing up in a house full of books but empty of conversation, about a father who spoke only in expectations and a mother who was present in body but unreachable in spirit. He told her he loved architecture because buildings, unlike people, never pretended to be something they were not. He told her he had spent years building something enormous, and somewhere along the way had forgotten to build anything for himself. He never lied, but he withheld. He gave her the emotional truth without the biographical details, and the omission sat in his chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing day, each shared laugh, each moment of trust she extended without knowing what she did not know. But in the mornings, sitting across from her, watching the steam rise from his coffee, while she told him about a child in her art class who had painted a purple elephant and declared it the most beautiful thing in the world. In those mornings, the stone felt lighter, almost bearable. Their friendship spilled beyond the walls of the café. They walked along the Savannah riverfront at dusk, the water catching the last amber light of the day, Spanish moss swaying gently from the oaks above, their footsteps falling into an easy rhythm on the worn brick path. They did not always talk. Sometimes they just walked, letting the silence between them fill with the sounds of the city, the distant strum of a guitar, the laughter spilling from a restaurant patio, the soft splash of the river against the stone embankment. On Saturday mornings, they explored the farmers' market downtown, tasting honey samples from a man with a white beard who called everyone darling, arguing playfully about which vendor had the best peach preserves. She always won, not because she was right, but because her passion for peach preserves was so earnest and specific that he could not bring himself to disagree. They sat on the steps of old churches and listened to the bells ring the hour, pigeons strutting around their feet with the self-importance of tiny dignitaries. They browsed second-hand bookshops, pulling volumes from dusty shelves and reading passages aloud to each other. He would find something he thought she would love and hand it to her with a quiet, for inspiration, and she would pretend to scold him for the intrusion, while secretly pressing the book to her chest like a treasure. One afternoon, they found themselves in a tiny art supply shop tucked down a side street she had never noticed before. The shelves were stacked floor to ceiling with pigments and brushes and handmade paper. The air smelled of linseed oil and cedar. Marin moved through the aisles like a child in a toy store, her fingers trailing over tubes of paint and bundles of sable brushes with a reverence that bordered on worship. She stopped in front of a set of watercolor tubes, professional grade, the kind she had coveted for years but could never justify the expense. She picked up a tube of cerulean blue, turned it over in her hands, her eyes bright with the quiet hunger of an artist who could feel possibility in color. "These are beautiful," she murmured. "Then get them," Dom said. She glanced at the price tag, hesitated, and set them down gently. "Another day," she said, her voice light, but her eyes lingering on the tube for just a moment longer than she intended. Dom watched her walk away from the shelf, and something inside him ached. Not pity, never pity, but a deep resonant sorrow for a world that made someone this radiant choose between art supplies and groceries. And beneath that sorrow, something else stirred, a fierce, quiet determination that he did not yet have the right to act on. Not until she knew the truth. The moments were small, everyday things, a shared muffin, a walk in the rain, a debate about whether jazz or blues was the superior soundtrack to a Sunday morning. Yet they were extraordinary in their simplicity. Each smile, each shared laugh, each casual touch of shoulders as they passed books between them, layered comfort and trust and warmth between their hearts like pages in a book they were writing together, without knowing it. For Dominic, these simple outings were a revelation. He had spent years in boardrooms and ballrooms, negotiating deals worth hundreds of millions, hosting dinners that cost more than most people earned in a year, attending events that were more about optics than substance. Yet here, walking along the river with a woman who taught watercolor to elderly people and tucked love notes under coffee sleeves, he found a serenity that all his wealth and power and influence had never given him. He could talk without pretense. He could laugh without caution. He could be present, truly present, not the man who was watched and envied and desired for his status. Just Dom, a man enjoying coffee and conversation and the rare pleasure of being noticed for who he was, not what he owned. And Marin felt it too, something shifting inside her. A slow tectonic movement she could not control and did not want to. She caught herself smiling when she heard the cafe door creak at 7:30. She noticed the way her pulse quickened just slightly when his eyes found hers across the counter. She became aware of his hands, the way they wrapped around the coffee cup, steady and careful. The way they rested on the table, open, unhurried. The way they sometimes hovered near hers, as though wanting to bridge a gap he was not yet sure he had permission to cross. She liked him, more than liked him. She admired his quietness, his depth, the way he treated every person in the cafe with the same steady respect. Mr. Hargrove, Juno, Diane, and her children. The homeless man Marin always gave free soup to on cold afternoons. Dom never looked away from anyone. He never made anyone feel invisible. But it was not a crush, not the breathless, giddy kind that burns fast and fades faster. It was the slow, tender awareness of someone whose presence made the world seem softer, easier, more bearable. The kind of feeling that does not announce itself with fireworks, but with the quiet certainty that something important has begun. And yet, she sensed something unspoken, a shadow behind his calm exterior, a weight he carried that she could feel but could not name, a hesitation in certain moments, a flicker in his eyes when she asked about his work or his past, as though he were constantly walking a tightrope between honesty and omission. She did not press. She did not need to, because right now, in these golden, unhurried moments, everything felt exactly right, and she trusted that whatever he was carrying, he would share it when he was ready. One Sunday morning, Dom arrived at her apartment door, not the cafe, her apartment, He had never come here before, and the fact that he had crossed that invisible boundary between public friendship and private trust, made her heart beat a little faster. He was dressed simply, a soft gray sweater, dark jeans, but there was an earnestness in his expression she had not seen before, a deliberateness in his posture, as though he had rehearsed what he was about to say a dozen times and was still not sure he had the words right. "Good morning," he said, and there was a subtle tension in his voice that she could not place. But there was something else too, vulnerability, raw and real. "Morning," she replied, searching his face. "Everything okay?" He nodded. "Better than okay. I was hoping you might join me for a drive, somewhere quiet, just for a little escape from the city." Her curiosity piqued. She gathered her scarf and bag, and as she followed him to the car, she noticed the way his hands trembled slightly as he opened her door, the way his jaw tightened for just a moment before he smiled, the way he looked at her, as if what he was about to do required every ounce of courage he had. The drive took them out of Savannah, down a winding country road that cut through corridors of golden autumn trees. The leaves were at their peak, every shade of amber and crimson and burnt orange, catching the morning light like stained glass. The air that drifted through the cracked windows smelled of earth and dry leaves and distant wood smoke. Acoustic music played softly from the car's stereo, a gentle finger-picked melody that seemed to belong to the morning itself. They did not talk much during the drive, but the silence was comfortable, full, the kind of silence that exists between people who have said enough to trust each other with the spaces between words. Eventually, Dom turned onto a narrow unpaved path, bordered by wildflowers and low stone walls. The road wound through a gentle valley and ended at a serene countryside property. Rolling hills stretched in every direction, dotted with ancient oaks and scattered with wildflowers that had survived into late autumn. A light mist rose from the fields, giving the landscape a dreamlike quality, as though they had driven not just out of the city, but out of time itself. A small pond reflected the pale morning sky like a mirror, its surface perfectly still, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang a single clear note that hung in the air like a prayer. He parked the car near a rustic wooden fence, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. They just stood there, breathing, taking in the silence, the beauty, the extraordinary stillness of a place that seemed to exist outside the reach of everything complicated and loud. Finally, Dom turned to her, his hands resting on the fence rail, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the air between them feel charged. "I wanted to show you this place," he said softly. "It is where I go when I need to think, when I need quiet. It is my refuge." Marin looked around, taking in the open fields, the mist, the wildflowers, the utter peace of a place that felt like it belonged in a painting. "It is beautiful," she whispered. He nodded, slowly, and she could see him gathering himself, collecting the words that had been building inside him for weeks, stacking them carefully, like stones in a wall he was about to dismantle. "There is something I want to tell you, Marin. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Not to impress you, not to change anything between us, but because you deserve honesty, and I cannot carry this any longer." Her heart fluttered, a mixture of anticipation and gentle apprehension settling in her chest like a held breath. "Okay," she said softly. "I am listening." He took a deep breath, the kind that comes before a leap. "My real name is Dominic Hale. I am the founder and CEO of Hale Enterprises. I built my company from scratch, and along the way, I guess I lost myself. I have spent years surrounded by people who only saw what I had, not who I was. My card that morning, it was a glitch in a system I could have resolved with a single phone call. But I did not, because for the first time in years, someone treated me like a person, not a portfolio, not a brand, not an opportunity, a person." He paused, his voice thickening with emotion he was not accustomed to showing. "And then I kept coming back, not because of the coffee, not even because of the cafe, because of you. Because every time I walked through that door, you looked at me like I mattered, not my name, not my net worth, me, just me. And I have not felt that in so long that I had forgotten what it was like." The silence that followed was vast, not cold, not angry, not shocked, just vast. like a sky after a storm clears, open and endless and full of possibility. Maren looked at him, really looked at him, and he braced himself for the shift, the recalculation, the subtle change in her eyes that always came when people learned what he was worth. The warmth replaced by assessment, the friendship replaced by strategy, the genuine connection poisoned by the knowledge of his bank account. But it did not come. Instead, her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. And her eyes, those warm, steady eyes that had seen him from the very first moment, did not change at all. "I do not care about your last name, Dom," she said quietly, her voice steady and sure. "I care about the man who sits in my cafe every morning, who listens like listening is an art form, who hands napkin notes back to me when I forget to write one for myself, who debates peach preserves like the fate of the world depends on it." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I fell for the man, not the empire." His breath left him in a rush, a sound that was half laugh, half something far more fragile. He looked away, blinking hard. And when he looked back, his eyes were bright, shining with the unmistakable gloss of tears he was too proud to shed but too honest to hide. "You have no idea," he whispered, "how long I have waited to hear someone say that." She reached out and took his hand, just that, fingers lacing together on the weathered wooden fence. Simple, unadorned, two hands finding each other in the quiet morning light, as naturally as breathing. They stood there for a long time, the mist lifting from the fields around them, the birds singing its clear notes somewhere above, the whole world soft and golden and still. And in that moment, the city, the obligations, the noise, and the names, and the numbers, all of it fell away, like dust shaken from a garment, leaving behind only what was real. Two people, standing in the light, holding on. You know what? This moment right here, this is what real love looks like. Not the flashy kind, not the movie kind, the kind that sees past the surface and holds on anyway. If this story is touching your heart right now, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the time. Because the best part, it is still coming. The weeks that followed were unlike anything either of them had experienced before. Not because they were dramatic or extravagant, but because they were honest, fully, completely, without reservation or pretense. Nothing about their daily rhythm changed. Not really. They still spent mornings at the Wren, Maren behind the counter, Dominic at his corner table. They still walked the riverfront at dusk and argued about peach preserves at the Saturday market. They still sat on church steps and browsed bookshops and listened to the violin player on Thursdays. But there was a new lightness between them. The stone of omission was gone, and in its place, a spaciousness, a freedom. Dominic breathed easier, laughed fuller, spoke with an openness that surprised even himself. He told her about the galas and the loneliness, the 300 handshakes and the 0 genuine conversations. He told her about the penthouse that cost $7 million and felt like a coffin. He told her about the assistants and advisors who managed his calendar but never asked about his heart. And Maren listened, the way she always did, with her whole self, without judgment, without fascination with the numbers, without the glazed look that came over people when they tried to comprehend wealth on that scale. She listened to the man behind the money, and she loved what she heard, not because of what he had, but because of who he was when he set it all down. One morning, a few weeks after the confession, Dominic arrived at the cafe with a small envelope. He handed it to her over the counter, his expression gentle but deliberate. Maren opened it. Inside was a single key, and a small card that read, "For the dream you have been carrying." She looked up, confusion and curiosity battling in her eyes. "It is a space downtown," he said, "near the riverfront. 2 stories, natural light from every window. I signed a 5-year lease on it. It is yours." Her first reaction was not what he expected. She did not gasp, did not cry, did not throw her arms around him in cinematic gratitude. She shook her head. "I cannot let you do this for me," she said, her voice firm, not angry, but sure. "I have spent my whole life earning everything I have. I cannot start taking." He had anticipated this, known it, perhaps even loved her more for it. He leaned forward, his voice low, careful, respectful. "This is not me doing it for you. This is me standing beside you while you do it yourself. Every decision, every brushstroke, every class, every penny of operating budget, yours. I do not want to build your dream. I want to watch you build it, and maybe, if you will let me, I want to hand you the occasional hammer." She studied him, searching his face for the catch, the condition, the invisible strings that always came attached to generosity at this scale. There were none. His eyes were steady, his hands were open. His offer was exactly what he said it was: support, not control; partnership, not patronage. She looked down at the key in her hand, and, slowly, a smile spread across her face, bright and fierce and full of everything she had been holding inside for years: determination, gratitude, independence, and the terrifying, beautiful thrill of a dream finally touching the ground. "I will do it," she said, "but everything else is mine to decide." "Everything," he agreed, and she did. She called it the Wren Studio, a nod to the place where everything had begun. She painted the walls herself, a warm sage green that made the light look like liquid. She built the shelving with the help of volunteers from the senior center. She designed the curriculum: watercolor for beginners, mixed media for children, open studio hours for anyone who wanted to create without cost or judgment. Dominic never interfered with her vision. He attended planning sessions only when invited, offered suggestions only when asked, carried furniture when she needed muscle, and stepped back when she needed space. He understood something that many people with his resources did not: that the greatest gift you can give someone is not the thing itself, but the freedom to make it their own. But their journey was not without its tensions. One afternoon, Marin was walking past a newsstand when a tabloid headline caught her eye: "Dominic Hale, Savannah's most eligible billionaire, spotted in local cafe." The photograph was grainy, clearly taken from across the street through a long lens, but it was unmistakably him, sitting at his corner table, coffee in hand, smiling at someone just out of frame. Her. She stood on the sidewalk, the paper trembling slightly in her hands, not because of the headline, but because of what it represented: a world she had never asked to enter, a spotlight she had never sought, the sudden jarring reminder that the man she loved existed in a universe of scrutiny and speculation and public consumption. A few days later, a former business associate spotted Dominic at the cafe, a man in an expensive suit who clapped him on the shoulder and said something about a merger, his voice loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. The mask slipped, just for a moment, and Marin saw it. The way Dominic's posture stiffened, the way his smile became the kind she had seen on magazine covers: polished, professional, empty. The man left, and the cafe returned to normal, but something in Marin's chest had tightened. Not doubt about Dominic, but doubt about herself, whether she belonged in his world, whether her small life, her modest dreams, her paint-stained hands and her napkin notes could survive the gravity of his. That evening, they sat on the bench by the river, the water dark and still beneath the fading sky, and she told him, honestly, the way they had promised to always be: "I am not afraid of who you are," she said. "I am afraid that the world you come from will swallow the world I have built." He was quiet for a long time, watching the water, feeling the weight of her words. Then he turned to her, his eyes steady and sure, and full of something that transcended reassurance, something that lived in the bones. "You are my world," he said. "The rest is just noise, and if the noise ever gets too loud, we will come back here, to this bench, to the river, to the place where it is just us." She believed him, not because of his words, but because of his actions. Every day, he showed up, not with grand gestures or expensive gifts, but with presence, with consistency, with the quiet, relentless commitment of a man who understood that love is not proven in moments of grandeur, but in the ordinary faithfulness of showing up, again, and again, and again. The day of the grand opening arrived, and the excitement in the air was almost electric. The Wren studio buzzed with life. Children chased each other between easels, their laughter bouncing off the sage-green walls. Elderly students from the senior center stood before their displayed watercolors, hands clasped, eyes bright with the particular pride that comes from creating something beautiful and seeing it honored. Local musicians played acoustic sets in the corner, a guitarist and a cellist whose music wound through the room like warm thread. The air smelled of acrylic paint, fresh bread from a nearby bakery that had donated trays of pastries, and possibility, that indefinable scent that exists wherever dreams are being realized. Marin moved through the crowd, radiant, her hair loosely pinned, her hands still faintly stained with pigment from last-minute touch-ups that morning. She introduced young artists to their stations, guided small hands over brushes, knelt beside a shy boy who was afraid to make his first mark on the blank canvas. "Just put the brush down and see what happens," she told him. "There are no mistakes in art, only discoveries." The boy pressed the brush to the paper, a streak of yellow, then blue, then a swirl of green where the colors met. His eyes widened, and a smile broke across his face, so wide and pure that Marin felt her own eyes sting. B was there, in her wheelchair, 92 years old and dressed in her best lavender cardigan. Her sunset painting hung on the main wall, the place of honor. When Marin had unveiled it, B had pressed her hand to her mouth, and the tears that rolled down her weathered cheeks were the kind that carry 92 years of living and hoping and creating inside them. "Every ending deserves to be beautiful," B whispered, and Marin held her hand and whispered back, "So does every beginning." Marin moved through the room, greeting familiar faces. Mr. Hargrove from the Café, reading the program notes with his usual scholarly attention. Juno, who had graduated last month and was now volunteering as a studio assistant. Diane, whose children were among the most enthusiastic painters in the room, their faces already streaked with color like tiny abstract masterpieces. And then she noticed him, Dominic, near the far wall, quietly, almost invisibly, hanging something, a frame. Curiosity drew her across the room. She wove between easels and clusters of guests, her footsteps slowing as she approached. As she saw what he was hanging, her breath caught. It was her sketch, the one from that very first night, the stranger with rain on his collar and an almost smile. The drawing she had made in the quiet corner of the Wren after closing, the one she had laughed at herself for creating, the one she had closed inside her sketchbook and tried to forget. She had given it to him weeks ago, casually, almost shyly, tucking it into one of the books he had bought her. As a bookmark, she had said, though they both knew it was more than that. He had kept it. He had framed it. A simple dark wooden frame, elegant but understated. And he had hung it in her studio, on the wall nearest the entrance, so it would be the first thing anyone saw when they walked through the door. "You framed this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes still fixed on the sketch. He turned to her, his expression calm and tender, his eyes holding hers with the quiet certainty of a man who knew exactly what he was doing and why. "I thought it deserved to be here," he said, "not just because it is beautiful, but because it reminds me of the beginning of everything. A declined card, a cup of coffee, a woman who was kind for no reason, and a drawing of a stranger who did not feel like a stranger." Her vision blurred. She pressed her fingers to her lips, overwhelmed, not by the gesture itself, but by the depth of attention it revealed. He had seen her, truly seen her, from the very first moment, and he had carried that seeing with him, quietly, faithfully. "All this time, you saw me," she whispered, "from the very first moment, and you saw me," he replied, when no one else could. They stood there, side by side, before the sketch that had started everything, the room alive with color and music and children's laughter around them. And in that moment, the world contracted to the space between their shoulders, the warmth of his presence beside hers, the quiet certainty that they had found something rare and irreplaceable. As the evening deepened, the guests filtered out one by one. B was the last to leave, wheeled out by her granddaughter. She paused at the door and looked back at Marin, smiled, and mouthed 2 words, "Thank you." The studio grew quiet, the canvases drying on their easels, the music fading into silence, the scent of paint and bread still lingering in the warm air. Marin and Dominic stepped outside onto the small wooden balcony that overlooked the street. The Savannah night was warm and velvet dark. The stars scattered like salt across a black tablecloth. Street lights cast pools of amber on the cobblestones below, and from somewhere unseen, a saxophone began to play. Slow, soulful, the kind of music that lives in the space between notes. She leaned against the railing, and he stood beside her, close enough that their arms touched, the warmth of his skin through his sleeve, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the quiet presence that had become the most important thing in her world. "I used to think love was supposed to arrive like a storm," she said softly, her eyes on the stars, loud, dramatic, impossible to ignore. "And now?" he asked. She turned to look at him, her eyes reflecting the streetlight, full of every moment they had shared, every coffee, every walk, every napkin note and bookshop argument and riverside silence. "Now I think it arrives like the morning," she said, quietly, gently, "and before you realize it, everything is illuminated." He smiled, the real smile, the one she had drawn in her sketchbook that first night, the one that started somewhere deep in his chest and rose slowly, reaching his eyes before it ever reached his mouth, filling his entire face with a light that had nothing to do with the street lamps and everything to do with the woman standing beside him. He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a small velvet box. Marin's breath stopped. He opened it. Inside, a ring, a single stone, not ostentatious, not blinding, not the kind of ring a billionaire was expected to give, but clear and radiant, like a drop of captured light, simple, honest, perfect. "I do not want to give you the world," he said, his voice rough with emotion, cracking at the edges. "I want to build one with you, one cup of coffee at a time, one walk at a time, one sunrise at a time, for the rest of our lives." She laughed, a sound that was half joy and half tears, her hands trembling, her heart so full she thought it might break open from the sheer impossible weight of happiness. "Yes," she whispered, 1,000 times. "Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him close, pressing her forehead against his, their breath mingling in the cool night air, the saxophone playing on, the stars burning quietly above, the city humming its ancient lullaby around them. And in that moment, time itself seemed to pause, holding the peace, the joy, the love they had built together, in its embrace. Months later, the Café, early morning. The light came through the windows the same way it always had, soft, golden, unhurried. The espresso machine hissed. Mr. Hargrove turned a page. The jazz record played its familiar melody. And behind the counter, Marin moved with her usual grace, her ring catching the light as she poured coffee. A small flash of brilliance with every gesture, like a secret only she and the morning sun shared. Dominic sat at his corner table. Same spot, same order, same quiet smile. He was reading, or pretending to, his eyes drifting over the pages without landing, because his attention, as always, was on her. The door creaked open, and a young woman stepped inside. She was perhaps 22, 23. Her hair was damp from the rain. Her clothes were wrinkled. Her eyes were red, and her shoulders carried the unmistakable weight of someone who had been crying and was trying very hard to pretend she had not. She approached the counter slowly, scanning the menu with the distracted gaze of someone who was not really reading, but needed somewhere to rest her eyes. Marin smiled, the same bright, instinctive smile she had given 1,000 customers before. "Good morning. What can I get for you?" The young woman ordered a small drip coffee, the cheapest thing on the menu. She fumbled with her wallet, counting coins with trembling fingers. Marin poured the coffee, set it on the counter, and as the young woman reached for it, Marin slid something beneath the sleeve, a small folded napkin, handwritten. The young woman walked to a table, sat down, took a sip, and then noticed the note. She unfolded it and read the words written in Marin's careful hand. Sometimes the smallest kindness can pour into a heart big enough to change 2 lives forever. The young woman stared at the note for a long time, her lips trembling, her eyes filling, and then, for the first time that morning, Perhaps the first time in days. She smiled. Across the room, Dominic watched, and he smiled too. The quiet, knowing smile of a man who understood that the woman he loved had not changed, not one bit. That the kindness that had drawn him into this cafe on a rainy Tuesday morning was not a performance or a phase or a strategy. It was who she was. It was who she would always be. And that was why he loved her. It was never a story about money. It was never about status or empire or the things the world tells us to chase. It was a story about a $5 cup of coffee and the woman who paid for it without thinking twice. It was a story about a man who had everything the world could offer and found that the only thing he truly needed was someone who saw past all of it. It was a story about how love does not arrive with fanfare or fireworks. It arrives quietly, in the steam rising from a paper cup, in a note tucked beneath a sleeve, in the steady, faithful presence of someone who shows up, again and again and again, not because they have to, but because they choose to. Because here is the truth no one tells you. Kindness is never wasted. It does not disappear. It does not evaporate into the air like steam from a coffee cup. It ripples. It reaches. It finds its way to exactly the heart that needs it most. Sometimes across a counter, sometimes across a lifetime. So the next time you have a chance to be kind, to a stranger, to a friend, to someone whose story you will never know, take it. Do not hesitate. Do not calculate. Do not weigh the cost. Because you never know. That one small moment, that $5 gesture, that napkin note you never expected anyone to read, might be the beginning of something extraordinary. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness matters. And if you are not subscribed to Mr. Andy Love Stories yet, join the family right now. We tell stories here that stay with you long after the screen goes dark. I will see you in the next one.